introduce our speaker this morning, Dr. Seema Jaitley, Managing Director of SJ Solutions. Seema has been specialising in pharmacovigilance for 20 years and has headed up global pharmacovigilance and medical affairs before setting up SJ Solutions. SJ Solutions' services span both consulting and contracting to provide solutions to drug safety, research, and other affairs relating to the running of a business within the pharmaceutical industry. She has helped companies in implementing the new EU legislation and is currently studying for her MSc in epidemiology. Seema, over to you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Just put your hand up or send us a chat if you can't. So we're going to talk about medical devices today and the vigilance system around medical devices. I think a lot of companies are heading towards having multiple products where they have devices as well as medicinal products as well as cosmetics. So I thought it'd be quite useful to cover this. So if we look at, first of all, the definition of a device, and I know there's a lot of information on this slide here, but this is the actual definition. I mean, it's basically an instrument, apparatus, appliance, software, material that really helps in diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, or treatment, but it doesn't achieve its action on the human body by a pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic means. And I think that's really important. That's what distinguishes a device from a medicinal product. So if you think about things like your glucose monitors, to take glucose levels in your blood, things like diagnostics, your defibrillators, your pacemakers, things like that, they're all devices. Remember, we had the issue with the silicone implants. They were devices as well. We've even had creams that are barrier creams that are devices. So, there's a whole host of things that are covered here. I mean, we think about medical devices, but of course, they don't always have to be medical devices. I think what's important, and we'll come on to that as well, is the device procedure is slightly different. They're not covered by the European Medicines Agency because it's not a medicine. You'd have to go onto the European Commission website, and that's where you find all of the legislation and the guidance as well. So if you look on the EMA website, it can be quite difficult to find anything because you're not looking in the right place. Okay, so I've put in some definitions here, really because I think in the pharmaceutical world, we tend to kind of focus on the medicinal products, and often we don't quite think about the device much. And I think it's quite useful then to have this as a reference. And if you want the slides later, if you get a recording of the webinar, you can keep these then for your own info. So immediately, standard, without any delay, that could be justified. What we talk about when we talk about device vigilance are incidents, but they're similar in a way to events. So it's something that happens or could have happened with the device. And I'll come on to the could have happened bit because that is something that is quite different to medicinal products. So, and it could also be down to something that could have happened due to inadequacy of the labeling or instructions. And as I said here, they talk about the direct or the indirect. You've got the malfunction as well, where there's a failure of a device to meet its performance as intended. So if you think about what a device is, it's not working as you would have expected it to work. And then we've got serious public health threat. I mean, a bit similar to, say, an emerging safety issue. We've got a similar situation with medicinal products. Imminent risk of death here, serious deterioration in state of health, or serious illness that requires prompt remedial action. And here really is something that would be, significant and unexpected, something like maybe, CJD, something like that, or possibility of huge number of deaths in a short time frame. So it's a standard definition there. Unanticipated, so deterioration in state of health that you wouldn't expect to see. Intended purpose, this is what the product has been developed for. It's in the labeling by the manufacturer or the instructions for use, etc. And use error is where you're getting a different result to that intended by the manufacturer or the operator of the device. Okay, so if we look at the directives that relate to the different devices, you can see that we've got three different ones here, and it's depending on what type of device that you have as to which directive is applicable. So you've got your active implantable devices in 2007, in vitro diagnostic medical devices, 2012 amended, and then your other devices as well. And generally what you'll see coming through is that your devices will be categorized into class 1, 2A, 2B, 3. This is quite similar to the US, and there's increasing probably risk-wise or certainly things that you need to do with regards to putting your device on the marketplace depending on what class your device is. So class 3 being the highest, where you would need clinical studies, etc., before you could put that product on the marketplace. And class 1 would probably be, it could even be a plaster or something like that. So huge amount of difference. And that was really because there was this understanding then that actually there are significant differences in the types of devices that you have, and there needs to be a sub-classification to ensure that devices that are riskier have had the proper testing beforehand before they're put onto the marketplace. So moving on. I thought I would mention EUDAMED. So this is the European database, a bit like Vigilance, but it's for the devices. And here we're looking at centralizing information for the devices, and you have information on the registration, all the etc., vigilance data as well, and any clinical investigations and the data around that. So that's kind of the one-stop shop database-wise from a European perspective. So moving on to the vigilance guidelines. So here we have a guideline that's been revised in January 2013, and it talks about the medical device vigilance system. And basically, it's meant to facilitate early detection and a harmonized approach as well across the member states, so that you're not getting a country-by-country kind of management of an incident or an issue that's ongoing. It's meant to harmonize, basically, and ensure that you do inform the national competent authorities appropriately of issues that are arising. And it covers incidents, which we're going to talk about, and also field safety corrective action. So that's a very device-type terminology, and you will see it abbreviated to FSCA, and that's what that means, field safety corrective action. You'll see that I've listed below the articles that are relevant in the different directives, so Article 8, Article 10, Article 11 for the active implant, the general medical device, and the in vitro diagnostic devices as well. And you can go back and have a look at that. But really, it's the medical device vigilance system described here that is important for the vigilance of devices. I thought I would just mention, they talk about manufacturer. Manufacturer is extremely important when it comes to devices, and if you don't have a manufacturer within the EU, you need to have an authorised representative, and they are responsible then for notifying national competent authorities about incidents and field safety corrective actions according to the criteria laid out in the guideline. They have to investigate the incidents and take corrective action where needed as well. So I think that is an important point. If you are working in a company where you don't have a base in the EU, you do need to have then an authorised representative who takes on the manufacturer's responsibilities within the EU. For two devices, if you've got two devices used together, you need to ensure that you submit two separate reports, so you have individual responsibilities for your device. You can't, have somebody else submit on your behalf who's got another device that's used in conjunction. Right, so now we come to incidents. So the way that I look at incidents, it's a bit like an event really with a product. But there is a difference here, because you can have an incident that causes direct harm. So you get direct harm occurring to a person who's using that device or has had something to do with that device. But you can also have indirect harm. And this is where, it may have led to something happening in somebody who's been using that device or exposed to the device in some way. And I think it's really important because you've got to think about what devices are, and remember I talked about diagnostic side of things and using, say, glucose strips, those are devices. And in those situations, you may not actually come into contact with the patient. It may be that blood is taken, something's taken away, and you have analysis. And so it's not direct contact with the patient. It doesn't act directly on the patient itself, and it can be difficult then to demonstrate that harm has occurred in this context. And what you need to do really is to consider that could this have led to something happening if, or has this led to a deterioration of the potential for deterioration in health, or led to death in some way indirectly. I'll come on to that in a minute with some examples, probably just to help people understand that a little bit more. I mean, there can be potential errors as well for labeling, instructions for use, inadequacies where self-testing is involved as well, and these inadequacies as well do need to could have led to harm to users, and they should be reported as well. And you would need to submit an incident report or submit a report even if you're in doubt. I'm going to come on to a couple of examples so that you can see what we're talking about here. And when you look at indirect harm, these are the things that you need to think about where there could have been the potential for death or serious impairment in some way. So if you think about misdiagnosis, delayed diagnosis, treatment not being given, or the wrong treatment being given as well. So whilst, the actual event may be that actually my monitor's not read this properly, that in itself probably doesn't seem like a big thing, but you have to think, well, if it hasn't read this properly, what are the consequences of that? And could there be indirect harm in this way? Could it be that actually a patient has received insulin when they shouldn't have received insulin, and that could have actually led to death, that could have led to a serious outcome? That would need to be then reported as an incident. Okay? So just to reiterate that, it's very clear in the guidance that not all incidents do lead to death or serious deterioration in health, but if that hasn't occurred, it could be just because you've been lucky or somebody has intervened, a healthcare professional else has intervened to ensure that that doesn't happen. So it is enough that you have an incident that is associated with the device, and if that occurred again, it might have led to death or serious deterioration in health. Okay? I'm sure there'll be a few questions on this afterwards, so I will leave some time for questioning. So bearing that in mind, we've got your direct harm, indirect harm. Your incident is something happening to the patient or the user or someone associated with the device. What you need to report based on these three criteria here. So these things need to be reported to the National Competent Authority. An event has occurred, so an incident, whether direct or indirect. Manufacturer's device is suspected to be causally related, so that's kind of like being causally related. And the event led to, or might have led to, the direct and indirect, to death of a patient, user or other person, or a serious deterioration in the state of health of a patient, user or other person. It can be difficult. I think, one of the biggest things is really understanding where no harm was caused but could have been caused. And we had a skin biopsy punch, and you take the biopsy and then it goes off obviously for analysis. It's used for diagnosis of, those kind of things. So if that doesn't work, you could potentially then not treat something that is extremely serious for the patient. So we did have a situation where it didn't quite work because it malfunctioned. You couldn't quite get the biopsy or full biopsy, and that actually then was an incident that did need to be reported, even though in that individual patient it didn't actually make that much difference. But it was the fact that if you thought ahead, yes, there was the potential for it to impact if it didn't work in somebody who did have something serious that did need to be treated. So looking at all of those situations separately. A is an event has occurred, and as we talked about, this could be a malfunction, it could be false positive, false negative, unanticipated reaction, interaction, inappropriate therapy given, or something to do with the labelling that means that it's not used properly. Could have led to a fire by accident. I think there were issues with tongs and stuff like that, or user error, so they're not using it properly, but that could be down to the labelling as well. You then need to look at the device being causally related in a way to the incident or the event that's occurred, and this should be based on what the healthcare professional is telling you, as well as any result you may have from your own analysis, as well as any previous kind of evidence that you have on file as well. And it can be difficult when you do have lots of drugs and devices involved. However, you should really err on the side of caution. So again, similar to the medicinal product side of things there. And then the event or might have led to death of a patient, user or other person, or serious deterioration in state of health, patient or user or other, health of the patient, user or other person. And a serious deterioration in state of health, I mean, this is a bit like the serious life-threatening illness, permanent impairment, needing medical intervention. It could be that, you've got an increase in duration of your surgical procedure that's clinically relevant. Maybe the device isn't monitoring things properly and you've ended up, an hour's operation has taken 4 hours, something like that. That needs to be considered. Indirect harm, which we've talked about, and then fetal distress as well. And just reiterate the fact that not all incidents lead to death. We've said this before, but it doesn't mean that it wouldn't have occurred, it wouldn't have led to that situation if it occurs again, and you do have to bear that in mind. So when we look at reporting, the reporting timelines are different. It depends on what you're seeing. If it's a serious public health threat, so that's like an urgent issue, that needs to be reported immediately. Always use this term, but really that's no later than 2 calendar days. If it's a death or unanticipated serious deterioration in state of health, that's 10 calendar days, and all others are 30 calendar days. You report to the National Competent Authority in the country of occurrence of the incident, and then you keep the notified body updated. So the notified body is involved in providing or working with the conformity assessment for the device and the CE marking within the EU. So whilst they're not it's not a national competent authority as such, it is the body though that is involved in the whole process of putting your, or evaluating the evidence of putting your product on the marketplace. I think we know that investigating exactly what's gone on is always really important. I mean, it's a bit like when you have a product quality complaint and you need to bring your product back and you need to analyze that. So it's the manufacturer's responsibility to do this, but if that's not possible, you need to inform the National Competent Authority immediately. And it's very, very important in the device setting to get the product back and analyze it properly. You need to make reasonable efforts to get your device back, and you should take into account that if there's a delay in getting the product back, what would you lose? So maybe digital data, battery life, something, things like that need to be taken into consideration, and every effort should be made to bring that product back in-house as soon as possible. Now, normally when you do an assessment, you need to alter the device, and that can then affect any subsequent analysis. So normally you're meant to inform the National Competent Authority before you do this, but the way that this is done is in the incident form. There's a standard statement, and the statement is in the guideline, and that's put in, and it will say something like the manufacturer will assume destructive analysis can begin 10 days following the incident report unless they hear back from the National Competent Authority. So that's the way that's done. And the reason for that is because the National Competent Authority may come back and say, no, we don't want you to touch the device. We want to see exactly what's going on, and then you can go and do your analysis. Okay, looking at follow-up now, this is always important. So you need to provide a follow-up report when you receive relevant follow-up information in-house, and a final report should be sent as well. And this is based on the outcome of your analysis, investigation of the device and any action that is required. So the outcome of this could be no action, or maybe additional surveillance or preventative action in future production of your device, or a field safety corrective action. So field safety corrective actions, FSCAs, and I'm sure those of you that subscribe to the MHRA, kind of the medical device side of things, will see these coming along, or certainly the field safety notification, you'll see them popping up. And for those of you that are not too familiar with the device side will wonder, but a field safety corrective action is an action that's taken by the manufacturer really to reduce the risk of death or serious deterioration in the state of health that's associated with the use of the medical device, and it's already on the marketplace. And there are different actions that can occur. So you could have a device recall, you could issue a field safety notification, you could have additional surveillance that's required, you could modify the design, or you could modify the labeling or instructions for use. So the field safety corrective action is sorting out the problem, doing something, and then usually the field safety notification is about notifying everybody, kind of healthcare professionals, public, consumers, etc., about what's been changed. So the field safety corrective action, if we look at the guideline covers EEA, Switzerland and Turkey. The FSCA does actually cover anything that's occurring outside of these territories as well. So if it's relevant for a product that's on the marketplace within these territories, you do need to consider any corrective actions taken outside of these territories. You, as I said, notify the FSCA via field safety notification. Inform the notified body. Remember, the notified body was involved in the conformity assessment procedure, putting the product on the marketplace, saying that yes, this is okay to go in the marketplace. And you meant to issue to the national competent authorities at the same time with all the relevant documents that you need. It's a bit like, I guess, their healthcare professional communication, but you get many more of these than you do with your DHPCs. You should send the draft a field safety notification to the relevant national competent authority, usually the one where the manufacturer is registered, and you should give them time to review that and come back with comments as needed, unless, of course, there's a serious public health threat. And you inform the coordinating national competent authority when that field safety corrective action has been completed, and there should be effectiveness measures included here. So if it's a device recall, you'd want to include perhaps percentages of devices that have been retrieved after that recall. So you can see there are some similarities there to a DHPC. So I wanted to talk as well briefly about periodic summary reporting. Now, this isn't an exact requirement within the guidelines, but it can be an alternative to individual incident reporting in certain situations. Has to be agreed with the national competent authority, and it can be used for reporting incidents after you've issued a field safety notification. So maybe, there's a field safety notification, something's been seen incident-wide, you're getting all this information in, it might be better to look at it on an aggregate level and then report that back to the national competent authority rather than on an individual basis and sending in individual incidents. You have to agree, though, with the coordinating national competent authority on the periodic reporting, and you should send the periodic report to all affected NCAs as well. You can also use periodic summary reporting for common and well-documented incidents as well. So these are things that would have been identified in your risk analysis, which is put together on an ongoing basis, but when you put your product on the marketplace, you've got a risk profile for the things that you know about that will occur, or incidents that are exempt from individual reporting, but you would still monitor these different events and incidents are coming in, reported into the company, and you would identify a trigger level, and then based on that trigger level, you would send a report to the national competent authority. So just to summarise that, the National Competent Authority may accept summary reports from the manufacturer. Has to be agreed, though, between the manufacturer and the NCA in an agreed format and frequency. And then you should inform the other national competent authorities received, but you can't just stop sending incident reports to the other national competent authorities. You have to agree individually that it's acceptable for them to receive the periodic reports rather than the individual incident reports. So similarly, you have trend reports. Now, the manufacturer has to document and assess trends with their devices. There is a requirement for that. So even if you're not reporting the incidents that come in, you need to document them and have a way, it's a bit like FSCA, have a way of being able to do trend analysis for anything that's going on with your product. If there is an increase in trend for a specific area or a specific issue, then you do need to report that to the National Competent Authority. And there is a template, actually there's a template for periodic and for trend reports as well within the guideline. So there are situations where reporting isn't required, and they're detailed here. So the first is deficiency of the device found prior to its use, and this is where there's no way that the product could have been used without that error being detected. So maybe an error message comes up in some way. An example of this would be packaging of a sterile single-use device and labelled with do not use if the packaging is opened or damaged. And it's obvious that the packaging is open or damaged before you use it, so there's no way that could have been used. That's not an incident to be reported. If we look at event patient conditions, this is where the root cause is really related to the patient and a pre-existing or concurrent condition or something occurring while they're taking the device, while they're using the device, I should say. I'm already talking in medicinal terms there. And an example of this would be a patient on dialysis who dies after dialysis treatment, but they had end-stage renal failure, and the death is actually related to the end-stage renal failure. The third one, shelf life exceeded, and it must be specified and written so that it's very clear what the shelf life is. But an example of this could be somebody admitted to hospital with hypoglycemia, but it could be because, or hypoglycemia because they've taken an insulin dosage based on a blood glucose level, but the strips that they used were out of date. So again, that's something that wouldn't be reported because it's expired, shouldn't have been used. Also, if you have protection against a fault that is inbuilt into the device and that functioned correctly, that doesn't need to be reported. Example here would be an infusion pump that stops due to malfunction, and then you get a beep, an alarm, which shows you that it stopped so that you can go in and actually change the infusion pump, so you wouldn't need to report that. And then we have the expected and well-known side effects. So these are usually clearly identified in the labelling. They're well-known because they've been identified in the risk analysis for the product on an ongoing basis and before the product's put on the marketplace. And an example of that would be patients suffering from claustrophobia and goes into an MRI scanner and experiences claustrophobia, and that's well known and it's documented in all of the product information for that device. So it's well known from that MRIs can lead to patients feeling very claustrophobic. It is recommended, though, that for the expected and foreseeable side effects aspects of things, that you do have a clinician involved in this. Just seeing the time, apologies, I'm running slightly behind. Also, where there's a negligible likelihood of death or serious deterioration, or where the risk has been quantified and found to be small, or if you have had an incident that did result in deterioration and reassessment determines that the risk remains negligible, these don't need reported. But you must document your decision, justification, that should all be documented so it's very clear to see. Okay. Just wanted to touch briefly on use error and abnormal use. So use error is not usually reported to the National Competent Authority unless it has led to death or serious public health threat or those types of issues, or serious deterioration state of health. Usually they're handled, though, within the manufacturer's quality and risk management system, and they're documented, and you'd go back and you'd refine the design of your device, and that would just go back into the quality management system for that. Abnormal use is reported to the National Competent Authority in certain situations, but it's out of scope of the guideline overall. You do receive reports from the National Competent Authority, and you should check these for reporting criteria and submit an incident report if required. If you don't submit, you need to let the National Competent Authority know why and state what will be done with the information, but it should go onto your database, your trend analysis, etc., and be captured as part of that. So we're near the end now. I just wanted to touch on the notified body. Talked about the notified body, as I said, involved in conformity assessments, placing the product on the marketplace. And whilst they don't play a key role on an operational side when it comes to medical device vigilance, they are involved in a number of things that are important from the vigilance perspective. So they do an audit of the implementation of your vigilance procedures and links with the other systems as well, so your corrective and preventative actions, your field safety corrective actions, etc. And they do assess the impact of vigilance issues on the certification that's been granted to the device. And they will liaise with the National Competent Authority if required. And they do audit, and usually audit is on an annual basis, so the procedures will be audited on an annual basis, as well as evidence for your vigilance activities. So in summary, it's a very quick trip through devices and device vigilance. I think if we look at medicinal products and devices, the one thing that is very different is this potential for harm or indirect harm that has to be considered. And that, as we know, is because patients may not directly use the device side of things. I think the assessment of the device is important. The technical side, you've seen the risk analysis, quality management system, that feedback into improving your device overall. The reporting timeframes are different with your 2, 10 and 30. No aggregate reports are mandated, but there is a need to review for trends, which is quite similar to medicinal products. It's probably not as, I think, robust and probably not as well developed, perhaps, as the medicinal product pharmacovigilance system is. However, you can see that there are certain similarities between the devices and the medicinal products. I think the hardest thing is the indirect harm. That can be very difficult to conceptualize, and you do really have to think outside of the box to get that on board. I'm going to stop there. Are there any questions? Oh, hang on, I've got a main chat here. Let's see. So safety reporting performed by UDAMED or UDRA Vigilance. So it's directly to the National Competent Authority. So the incident should be updated on an annual basis. Does this mean follow-up incident closed? It means that you've got to make sure that, yes, you do close that incident completely with the analysis of your results. You know, you'd be brought in for an investigation, and it should be updated with that and closed out. So if a device is recalled, does the manufacturer have to provide an alternative to the patients? Well, no, not necessarily. But again, within the guide, there's a list of all the things that need to be considered, a bit like a Dear Healthcare Professional communication, where it talks about the benefit, the risk, what do you do instead, what's the issue, what could happen, etc. So there's a whole list of things there that will help guide you towards what to put in. So device test Down syndrome came back negative, but baby was born with Down syndrome. Test says not 100% precise, as most devices. Does this need to be reported? I think what you would want to do is you would want to look at why you've had that come back as negative. Are there any other issues associated with the use of that device? If there aren't, and it's functioned normally, there are no other issues, then I would say that you wouldn't need to report that. What are the implications for the manufacturer if they do not report incidents to the NCAs? That I'm not sure about. I'm sure there is. There must be legislatively. I'll have to look at that and find out and come back to you on that one. I'm afraid I don't know exactly what the legislative criteria are. I meant diagnostic device, other things were ruled out. I would say no, because it's been used in the correct way. It should have been identified in the risk analysis that, sorry, this is Ruba's question that I'm about the Down syndrome, because the risk analysis should state that it's not going to diagnose every case, so there isn't 100% precision. If it's documented and it's known and agreed and you have the device on the marketplace, based on that, you shouldn't need to report that. Okay, great. So are there any other questions? Okay, thanks. Thanks, Brianna. Anything else? See if we are typing. I don't think it's via fax. I think it's via email. I think John's typing, or was typing. No, John, stop typing. Okay, well, I'm going, oh, thanks. Thanks, John. So if you do have any questions or any further, I know that was a very quick run through, and if you're not used to devices, and it can be quite easy to forget when you've not been dealing with devices as well, so, you know, it's not an easy area. Just send me an email, ask any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.